Shaquille O'Neal was enjoying a rare moment of peace in a McDonald's on Sunset Boulevard, away from the media's attention. Suddenly, a nervous 5-year-old boy approached him, clutching a broken toy car. The boy leaned in and whispered something in Shaq's ear, causing a noticeable change in Shaq's expression. Without hesitation, he took out his phone and called 911. What followed was a story filled with courage, empathy, and hope that will move you. Before we delve into this touching tale, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Tomorrow, we'll bring you another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The soft, golden sunlight bathed Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles, creating a peaceful afternoon amidst the usual city hustle. Shaquille O'Neal, the basketball star known for his dominance on the court, had just finished a charity event. He spent time with underprivileged children, sharing laughter, handing out gifts, and engaging in meaningful activities. Despite his towering height, Shaq's warm heart made him an inspiration to many, especially kids who never dreamed of meeting such a larger-than-life figure. After hours of high-energy activities, instead of heading home or going to an upscale restaurant, Shaq chose to enjoy a rare, simple meal at McDonald's. Driving his familiar SUV, he cruised down Sunset Boulevard and spotted the Golden Arches, chuckling to himself about how long it had been since he had a Big Mac. As he entered the restaurant, he ducked slightly to avoid hitting the low doorway. Inside, the atmosphere was filled with the sounds of everyday life. Children laughing in the play area, orders being called from the counter, and the delicious smell of fries and burgers in the air. His presence immediately attracted attention, though no one said anything. It was clear everyone recognized him. He was a legend with a towering stature and a kind smile that brightened any room. However, instead of loud whispers or interruptions, the restaurant continued its usual rhythm. Shaq had earned a reputation as a down-to-earth and approachable person who respected others' personal space, even with his immense fame. He stepped up to the counter, ordered a Big Mac, large fries, and a soda, then settled at a quiet corner table. As he sat down, he turned off his phone and let out a deep breath. This was one of those rare moments of tranquility, away from camera flashes and business pressures. Each bite of the warm burger took him back to simpler times, when happiness came from small joys like a meal after a tiring practice. Observing the people around him, he felt a sense of warmth. Despite the chaos in the world, moments like this showed that happiness didn't require extravagance. However, something unusual caught his eye at a nearby table. A small boy was staring intently at him, his bright eyes shining with a hint of worry. In his hands, he clutched a little toy car with a broken wheel. Shaq smiled gently, thinking the boy was likely starstruck, as many kids were when they saw him. He nodded slightly, silently encouraging the boy to come over. Yet instead of rushing over like most kids would when they saw their idol, the boy hesitated. There was something in his expression that seemed off. Shaq's instincts kicked in. Perhaps this peaceful afternoon was about to take an unexpected turn. He glanced at the boy again, noticing that those innocent eyes held more than just the typical curiosity of a child seeing a famous person. There was a faint, unspoken fear and an unusual weariness in them. The boy remained seated, clutching the toy car as if it were the only thing he could hold on to. Next to him sat a man, who Shaq guessed was the boy's father, Harris. The man didn't look like the kind of dad who would take his child to McDonald's. Dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit, his slick-back hair was immaculate, with every strand in place. But it was Harris' polished exterior that truly caught Shaq's attention. Harris' eyes were cold and sharp, like a hawk tracking his prey. He watched every move Billy made, his gaze controlling, tinged with irritation. Harris didn't look at the boy with the warmth or patience a father usually would. Instead, his stare was a silent warning, as if daring the boy to do something wrong. Billy sat still, but his eyes kept darting between the toy car in his hands and Shaq. It was as if he was mustering the courage to do something that would defy Harris' control. Shaq could feel the tension between them, like a rope pulled too tight, about to snap. Harris was on the phone, his voice low, but the urgency in his words showed his impatience. "Don't mess this up," he said, lowering his voice but still sounding irritated. "I'll bring the boy on time, but you need to do your part." Shaq listened, trying not to show his curiosity, but Harris' words raised alarm bells in his mind. The phrase "bring the boy" echoed in his head, a silent warning. Shaq sat down with his drink, observing without drawing attention to himself. Harris ended the call, scanning the restaurant before his eyes landed on Billy. "Sit up straight, Billy," he ordered in a calm but icy tone. Billy immediately straightened, gripping his toy car tightly, his hands trembling slightly. Shaq noticed it all, the boy's timed movements, the predatory gleam in Harris' eyes, and a sense of unease stirred within him. He had met all kinds of people in his career, good and bad, and his instincts were rarely wrong. But Harris was someone he couldn't trust, though he couldn't act on his gut feeling without knowing the full story. Then something unexpected happened. Billy slowly slid off his chair, his small feet making no sound as he walked toward Shaq. He gripped the toy car tighter, as though drawing strength from it. Harris immediately noticed, his gaze locking onto Billy with stern disapproval. But Billy didn't move toward him. Instead, he walked cautiously toward Shaq, his eyes fixed on the big man he only dared to glance at from a distance. Shaq looked up, surprised to see the boy approaching. Billy stopped in front of him, gazing up with anxious eyes. Shaq offered a gentle smile, lowering himself slightly to be at eye level with the boy. He said nothing, waiting for Billy to speak. Billy clutched the toy car, his small hands shaking. Then he spoke in a barely audible whisper, and Shaq had to lean closer to hear him. "Mister," Billy said, his eyes darting nervously toward Harris before meeting Shaq's again. "He's not my dad. I need your help to save my mom." The weight of the words hit Shaq like a punch to the stomach. He could feel the tension around him grow heavier. Billy's tear-filled eyes showed determination, making it impossible for Shaq to ignore him. In the distance, Harris stood up, his sharp gaze cutting towards Shaq and Billy. Shaq realized his peaceful afternoon was over. It was time to act quickly. Shaq, still seated, noticed the boy moving toward him. He raised an eyebrow, set down his potato chips, and gave Billy a concerned look. Every step Billy took was hesitant, but his eyes shone with determination. Shaq leaned down as Billy approached. His warm smile meant to reassure the boy. "Hey kid," Shaq said kindly. "Do you need my help?" Billy looked up, his bright blue eyes reflecting a faint glimmer of hope. He hesitated for a moment, clutching his broken toy car. Then, in a trembling voice, just above a whisper, he said, "Sir, my mom, she needs help." He heard her. Shaq froze for a moment, trying to process what he had just heard. His gaze shifted from Billy to the table, where Harris sat. The man in the suit noticed Billy's absence and immediately stood up. He scanned the restaurant, his eyes landing on Shaq. In that instant, Harris' expression changed, dropping the calm facade and revealing a cold, calculated demeanor. He lowered his phone, adjusted his suit, and walked toward Shaq with purpose. The rest of the restaurant continued with the usual noise, but at that corner table, everything seemed to freeze. Harris, dressed in his pristine suit, stopped just short of Shaq. Billy immediately lowered his head, pressing closer to Shaq, trembling but still clutching his toy car as if it were a shield. Shaq rose to his full height, his towering frame naturally placing himself between Billy and Harris. He didn't say a word, his gaze firmly locked on Harris. Harris stopped in front of Shaq, trying to put on a polite smile, but his eyes betrayed his irritation. "Sorry if the boy bothered you," Harris said, his tone light but his words sharp. "He's a bit restless." Shaq gave a faint smile, though his eyes never left Harris. "It's fine," he replied. "He just wanted to talk to me for a moment." The tension in the air thickened, and Harris paused, sensing something wasn't right. The conversation seemed to be growing more complicated. The usual sounds of the restaurant faded into the background as the two men stood facing off, one exuding a sense of protection, the other a silent threat. Billy, still by Shaq's side, clung to his arm, his silent plea unmistakable. Shaq rested a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder, creating a protective barrier. He could feel Billy's fear, and he knew he couldn't let the boy return to Harris without intervention. At that moment, a waitress, who had been quietly observing the situation, approached with a small glass of water. "Everything okay, Mr. Shaq?" she asked, her eyes briefly flicking to Harris, sensing the tension. Shaq gave her a faint smile, trying to defuse the situation. Thanks, everything's fine, he said. But I think Billy needs a little time to relax. His words weren't just for the waitress. They carried a subtle message for Harris. But Harris wasn't ready to back down. I don't see why we need to drag this out, he said, his voice sharper now. We need to leave. Shaq stood up, his imposing frame completely blocking Billy from Harris' view. Wait a moment, Shaq said calmly, leaving no room for argument. Billy wanted to discuss the car with me. It wouldn't take long. Harris squinted, and for a brief moment, his polished demeanor seemed to crack, revealing something darker underneath. He glared at Shaq, then at Billy before stepping back, but his eyes remained fixed on Shaq, filled with menace as if to deliver a silent warning. You don't know what you're getting into. Shaq stayed calm, aware that this was only the start. The message he had sent was delivered, and now it was just a matter of waiting for help to arrive. He could feel the rising tension. Harris, despite trying to appear calm, was beginning to lose control. His cold, piercing gaze swept over Shaq before pausing on Billy, as if sending a warning. But Billy, though small and trembling, gripped Shaq's arm tightly, finding rare comfort in this suffocating situation. Shaq leaned down, speaking softly, just loud enough for Billy to hear. Billy, can you tell me what's happening? I'm here to help you. It's going to be okay. Billy looked up at Shaq, his green eyes filled with hesitation and fear. His small hand clutched the broken toy car as if it were his only source of stability. After a moment of silence, Billy whispered, his voice shaky but clear, Uncle, my mom, he hurt her. I don't know what to do. He won't let me tell anyone. Shaq felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Each word from Billy pierced his mind. Billy's mother, Sarah, was in danger, hurt and confined by Harris. This situation was now more than just a grumpy man and a scared child. Shaq gently squeezed Billy's small shoulder for reassurance. You're brave, Billy. Your mom will be okay, I promise. Before Shaq could ask more, Harris moved forward. His large frame seemed smaller next to Shaq's towering figure. His face was tight, and the fake smile had vanished. I think this has gone too far, he said, his voice low but sharp, laced with subtle threats. Billy, come here now. I won't say it again. Billy jumped back, moving further towards Shaq. He trembled but refused to go near Harris. Shaq stood tall, his body a barrier between Billy and Harris. He didn't need to speak. His sharp gaze communicated clearly. Harris would not touch this boy. Harris narrowed his eyes, fury building within him, but he tried to maintain his composure. He stepped closer, his voice colder and sharper. I don't think you understand the situation. This is family business. You have no right to interfere. Shaq raised an eyebrow, his eyes locked on Harris. Billy doesn't seem like he wants to go anywhere, he said, his tone calm but warning. And when a child is scared, I think everyone has the right to step in. Harris sneered, his smile filled with danger. You have no idea what you're getting into, Shaq, he said, his voice dropping low as if testing Shaq's patience. Shaq didn't blink, his posture steady like a mountain. I may not know all the details, he replied, his voice deep but firm. But I do know one thing. This child is scared of you. And when someone needs help, I don't just stand by and watch. Billy, still clutching Shaq's arm, spoke with a tremor that made the situation even more urgent. Uncle, my mom said she'd be okay, but she can't stand up. I'm so scared. Those words only strengthened Shaq's belief that the boy and his mother were in serious danger. He could see the suffering in Billy's eyes and recognize the dark control Harris had over them. Realizing that Shaq had learned too much, Harris completely lost his patience. Fine, he said, his voice now full of menace. You want to play the hero. You want to keep him here. Fine, but I'll make sure you regret it. Shaq stared directly into Harris' eyes, unfazed. If that's a threat, you'd better be careful who you're talking to, he said, his tone heavy with meaning. The tension rose as Harris began to move closer, trying to apply pressure. Just then, Shaq heard the distant sound of police sirens. He looked at Billy and quietly said, You're safe now, Billy. Help is on the way. Realizing his time was running out, Harris' eyes flashed with one last burst of aggression before he retreated to the desk. But Shaq knew this confrontation was just beginning. The sound of police sirens echoed through the air, breaking the usual rhythm of the McDonald's restaurant. Shaq glanced out the window and saw two patrol cars arriving, red and blue lights swirling and reflecting on the glass walls. He placed a hand on Billy's shoulder, leaned down slightly, and whispered, "Stay here, Billy, everything is going to be okay." Realizing the police had arrived, Harris quickly changed his behavior. The cold smile faded, replaced by a calm and confident look, as if he were greeting unwanted guests. He straightened his suit jacket, stood tall, and walked toward the entrance, ready to face a situation he thought he could control. Two police officers entered the restaurant, scanning the crowd before focusing on Shaq and Harris, two men facing each other in a tense standoff. One of the officers, Sergeant Ramirez, stepped forward and asked in a professional yet firm tone, "We received a call about a suspicious situation involving a child. Is there someone here named Billy?" Before Shaq could reply, Harris interrupted, stepping forward to shake Ramirez's hand. "Good evening, officers. I'm Daniel Harris. I think there's a misunderstanding. The boy Billy is my son, and we're just having dinner. Nothing unusual here." Ramirez looked at Harris, then turned to Shaq, his eyes sharp with scrutiny. "Are you the one who called us?" he asked. Shaq nodded, his voice steady and firm. "Yes, I am. I think you should hear from the boy before jumping to conclusions." Harris let out a dry, theatrical chuckle. "Oh, that's really not necessary. Billy's just a little shy, aren't you, son?" He turned to Billy, his voice sweet, but with a menacing edge. Billy remained silent, clinging to Shaq's side, his wide eyes filled with fear, unable to speak. Seeing this, Shaq knelt down and gently placed a reassuring hand on Billy's shoulder. "Billy, can you tell them what happened? No one can hurt you here." Billy looked up at Shaq, mustering his courage, and nodded slightly. He turned to Ramirez and spoke quietly but clearly. "He's not my dad. My mom said he's her friend, but he hurts my mom. He locked her in the house." Billy's words caused Ramirez and his partner, Officer Vega, to immediately change their demeanor. Ramirez turned to Harris, his gaze sharp as a knife, but Harris kept his composure, shaking his head with a faint dismissive smile. "I have no idea what this kid is talking about. Kids, you know, they have wild imaginations." Shaq rose to his full height, his presence commanding the room. "Do you want to explain why the boy is so afraid of you?" he asked, his deep voice carrying an undertone of menace. Feeling the pressure, Harris raised his hands defensively. "Look, I've got nothing to hide. I'm just trying to get the boy home. If you need to check anything, go ahead. I just want this resolved quickly." At that moment, a server approached with a backpack. "This backpack belongs to him," she said, pointing to Harris. He left it on the table. Ramirez took the backpack and opened it, his expression hardening as he looked inside. The bag contained personal documents belonging to Sarah, a notebook detailing the mother and child's movements, and even a map marking a remote area. Officer Vega, kneeling next to Billy, asked gently, "Billy, do you recognize this backpack?" Billy nodded, his voice soft but firm. "He always carries it. My mom said it has bad stuff in it." Ramirez looked at Harris, who was now struggling to maintain his cool, his hands clenched into fists. "Mr. Harris, we have enough grounds to suspect you. I need you to stay right here while we investigate further." Realizing the situation was turning against him, Harris took a deep breath, but his eyes gleamed with danger. "You're making a big mistake," he said, his voice low and sharp. "I have a lawyer. You'll regret this." Shaq said nothing, stepping back to create a safe distance between Harris and Billy. He knew this was just the beginning, but he felt he had done the right thing. The truth was starting to come to light. The police patrol car sped down the empty road, its flashing lights reflecting off the houses. Shaq sat in the back seat, with Billy pressed close beside him, clutching a broken toy car tightly. The boy was silent, staring out the window as if fearing what lay ahead might be worse. Shaq placed a reassuring hand on Billy's shoulder. "Billy, I'm here. No one can hurt you anymore." Billy glanced up, a faint glimmer of hope shining in his tear-streaked eyes. Officer Ramirez drove quickly toward the quiet neighborhood where Billy lived. It was a row of peaceful homes, but Sarah's house stood out, unnervingly. The porch light was off, and the front door hung slightly ajar, creating an unsettling feeling. Ramirez exchanged a look with Officer Vega before signaling Shaq and Billy to stay in the car. "Wait here. We'll check it out first," he said, his tone serious yet steady. Shaq, despite understanding the procedure, couldn't hide his worry. "Be careful. There might still be danger inside," he warned, his voice low and filled with concern. The two officers drew their weapons and approached the house. When Vega gently pushed the door, it swung open effortlessly, creaking slightly as if announcing the chaos within. The beam of their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing a disordered scene. Furniture overturned, a chair lying on its side, and shards of a broken lamp scattered across the floor. Shaq couldn't stay still. He carefully guided Billy out of the car, keeping the boy close behind him for protection. The moment they stepped through the doorway, Shaq felt the heavy atmosphere of the house, as if it was filled with fear and suffering. Vega's voice rang out from the living room, and Shaq and Billy hurried in. The sight before them made Shaq's chest tighten painfully. Sarah lay motionless on the floor, her face pale and her disheveled hair partly covering her features. A small wound on her forehead still oozed blood, a heartbreaking sign of what she had endured. Billy let go of Shaq's hand and ran to his mother's side. "Mom," he cried, his voice filled with panic. Shaq quickly knelt beside Sarah, checking her pulse. "She's alive," he said, relief and urgency mixing in his voice. "We need an ambulance immediately." Vega wasted no time calling for help while Ramirez continued to search the house. The disarray around them painted a clear picture of the abuse Sarah had suffered. On the living room wall, a broken clock hung crookedly, and a family photo lay shattered on the floor. This wasn't just a fight. It was evidence of the cruel control Harris had over Sarah and Billy. In a corner of the house, Ramirez found a backpack. When he unzipped it, he realized it belonged to Harris. Inside were documents related to Sarah and a chilling notebook outlining his plans. It contained everything from a daily schedule of Sarah's movements to notes on how he would handle her if she didn't comply. Among the pages was an old photograph of Harris and Sarah, a haunting reminder of a relationship that had long since turned toxic. "This explains everything," Ramirez said, his expression dark as he handed the backpack to Vega. "He wasn't just abusing her. He was planning to kidnap Billy. He wanted to take the boy far away." Shaq clenched his fists, his eyes moving to Billy, who was kneeling next to his mother, gently holding her hand as tears flowed down his cheeks. "Mom, please don't leave me," Billy whispered, his voice shaking, as if a louder sound might break the fragile moment. Shaq knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on Billy's shoulder. "Billy, your mom is going to be fine, I promise." The distant sound of ambulance sirens grew louder, and Shaq felt relief knowing help was finally on the way. But anger simmered inside him. Harris had not only hurt Sarah, but was also trying to tear apart her family. He couldn't get away with this. As paramedics lifted Sarah onto a stretcher and carried her to the ambulance, Vega went with them to assist Ramirez. After giving a brief report on the situation, Ramirez turned to Shaq. "Thank you for being here. Without you, this boy could have been in even more danger." Shaq glanced at Billy, who still held his broken toy car tightly, his worried eyes fixed on the ambulance as it drove away. "I just did what I had to do," Shaq replied, his voice firm. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over. Harris was still out there, and justice needed to be served. Outside the quiet house, the flashing lights of police cars lit up the scene as Harris was led out of the patrol vehicle by two officers. They, with stern faces, cuffed him after thoroughly reviewing the evidence from his backpack and Billy's testimony. Harris' once immaculate charcoal gray suit was now wrinkled, but it was the blazing fury and hatred in his eyes that made him truly frightening. "You'll pay for this," Harris shouted, his voice echoing through the stillness. "I didn't do anything wrong. That kid's lying. You don't understand any of this." Shaq stood beside Billy, his strong presence forming a barrier between the boy and the angry man. Billy clung tightly to Shaq's hand, his frightened eyes gradually finding comfort in that protective grip. Harris turned his spiteful gaze towards Shaq. "Who do you think you are? Some kind of hero? You have no right to interfere." His teeth were clenched, and his twisted smile became more grotesque under the flashing lights. Shah remained calm, his steady gaze unwavering. "I don't need to be a hero," he said, his voice low but determined. "As long as I'm here, Billy will be safe. This boy deserves a better life, one without threats like you." Harris struggled harder, but the officers held him tight, preventing him from getting close to Shah or Billy. "I'll be back," Harris screamed, his voice hoarse with rage. "You don't know what you've done. I'll make you regret this." Shah shrugged, his expression unchanged by the threats. He looked down at Billy and spoke softly. "Don't worry, Billy. You'll never have to face him again." Billy nodded, his eyes wide, but now glimmering with a hint of newfound trust. He clutched his toy car tightly, as if it were a shield protecting him from danger. Officer Ramirez emerged from the house, carrying Harris' backpack and a notebook. He handed them to Vega, who had been carefully documenting the evidence and photographing the scene. Ramirez turned to Shah and nodded in silent gratitude. "We have enough evidence. He doesn't stand a chance in court." Shah simply nodded, his gaze fixed on Harris, who was being led into the patrol car. Harris continued to yell and threaten, but the man who once appeared confident and in control now looked like a desperate, hate-filled shadow of himself. As the police car carrying Harris drove away, the tension in the air seemed to fade. Shah knelt down and placed a reassuring hand on Billy's shoulder, looking deeply into the boy's eyes. "You're safe now, Billy. No one can hurt you or your mom anymore." Billy looked up at Shah, tears welling in his eyes. "You're staying with me, right?" he asked, his voice small but filled with hope. Shah smiled and nodded firmly. "Of course, I'll stay until everything is sorted out." Billy nodded slightly, a faint smile appearing, the first Shah had seen since the boy approached him at McDonald's. Though the outside world still held dangers, in that moment Billy felt he wouldn't face them alone. Officer Vega approached, extending a hand to Shah. "Thank you for your courage and quick action in calling us. Not everyone would step up to protect a child like you did." Shah returned the handshake, gently ruffling Billy's hair. "I just did what had to be done," he replied in a warm tone. "This boy has been through enough. Now it's time he gets the help he needs." Ramirez added, "We'll make sure Harris faces full prosecution. With Billy's testimony and the evidence, there's no way he'll escape a harsh sentence." Shah nodded, knowing justice would prevail, but his heart was focused on a greater mission, ensuring that Billy and his mother found safety and a chance for a better life. The gentle morning sunlight streamed softly through the hospital window, casting a warm glow over everything in the quiet room. Sarah slowly opened her eyes, feeling the throbbing pain on her forehead, reminding her of what had happened, the screams, the fall, and the suffocating fear that no one could save her and her son from Harris' grasp. She looked around the room and immediately saw Billy sitting beside her, his small hand tightly clutched in hers. "Mom," Billy cried, his voice filled with relief and joy. Tears welled up in his eyes as he leaned down to hug her. Despite her weakness, Sarah managed to smile and wrapped her arms around him. "I'm here, sweetheart. Everything's okay now, isn't it?" Billy looked up and nodded firmly. "Yes, Mom. Uncle Shaq saved us. He's our hero." The name Shah surprised Sarah, and just then, a large figure appeared in the doorway. Shaquille O'Neal stepped in, his towering frame making the room feel even smaller. In his hand, he held Billy's old toy car, carefully repaired and shining with a fresh coat of paint. "Good morning," Shaq said, his deep, warm voice as comforting as the sunlight pouring into the room. He smiled when he saw Sarah was awake, his eyes reflecting his relief. "I guess you had a long nap." Sarah looked at him, tears filling her eyes as she realized this was the man who had saved her and her son. "Thank you," she said, her voice weak but full of emotion. "If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened. You saved our lives." Shaw pulled up a chair next to the bed and placed the toy car in Billy's hands. "No need to thank me," he said, his gaze kind as he shifted between Sarah and Billy. Billy was truly brave. He was the real hero because he reached out for help. "I just did what anyone would do," Shaq replied. Billy gazed at the toy car in his hands, his eyes brightening. "You fix it for me?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. Shaq smiled and ruffled the boy's hair. "It didn't take much, but I thought you deserved to have your favorite toy back." Holding the toy car tightly, Billy gave his first genuine smile since the ordeal began. "Thank you," he said softly, filled with gratitude. Sarah looked at Shaq, her eyes overflowing with appreciation. "You didn't just save Billy, you saved me and gave us a second chance. No words can express how thankful I am." Shaq tilted his head, his gaze sincere. "Sarah, you and Billy have gone through so much. I just hope you both can live in peace from now on. If you ever need anything, I'm here." Sarah nodded slightly, tears streaming down her face. She realized the long road to recovery lay ahead, but Shaq's support and Billy's bravery had sparked a light in her life, one she thought had gone out. Outside the window, the Los Angeles sky was a bright blue, promising a brighter day. Billy sat in the chair next to the bed, playing with his toy car and occasionally looking at his mother with a newfound sense of peace. For him, having his mom back was all that mattered. Shaq stood up and moved toward the door, but paused to look back at Sarah and Billy. "You need to rest. I'll be right outside if you need anything." Billy rushed over and hugged Shaq's leg tightly. "Don't go far, okay?" Shaq crouched down and gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'll always be here when you need me. Take good care of your mom, all right?" Billy nodded enthusiastically. "I promise." As Shaq left the room, he realized he hadn't just helped a family escape danger. He had given them a chance to start anew. However, he also knew there was still work to do, from making sure Harris faced justice for his actions to supporting Sarah and Billy in reclaiming their peace. He was determined to keep going until everything was truly right. Shaq stood outside the hospital hallway, his eyes quietly focused on the door of the room where Sarah and Billy were sharing their first peaceful moments after days of turmoil. He held the phone, having just finished an important call. This wasn't just about being a protector. It was a responsibility he felt compelled to take on, ensuring Sarah and Billy had a chance to rebuild their lives. Over the years of his philanthropic work, Shaq had built connections with community organizations across the U.S., especially those supporting women and children who had faced abuse. Upon hearing Sarah and Billy's story, he quickly contacted a shelter in Los Angeles that specialized in safe housing, legal help, and emotional support for survivors. "We're ready to help," came the voice on the other end of the line. "If you can get them here, we'll ensure they're cared for and protected." Relief washed over Shaq at those words. But for him, providing a safe place wasn't enough. He wanted Sarah and Billy to receive full support, financial, legal, and emotional, so they wouldn't have to live in fear again. Within a few days, with police assistance, Sarah and Billy were moved to the shelter, a warm and safe environment staffed with dedicated individuals and programs designed to help rebuild lives. When they arrived, Sarah held Billy's hand tightly, her eyes filled with worry yet glimmering with hope. Shaq was by their side, not just as a protector, but as a loyal companion. "This is just the beginning," he said as he guided them inside. "Things will get better from here, I promise." Sarah looked up at Shaq, tears in her eyes. "You've already done so much. I don't know how to thank you enough." Shaq smiled gently, ruffling Billy's hair. "You don't need to thank me. This is about you and Billy. You both deserve a better life." Still, Shaq understood that bringing Harris to justice was vital for their long-term safety. With the shelter's legal team, he covered the legal costs to ensure Harris faced the consequences of his actions. Evidence from Harris' backpack, along with Sarah and Billy's testimonies, was strong enough to charge him with several crimes, including abuse, unlawful restraint, and attempted kidnapping. Shaq attended every court hearing, not seeking attention, but sending a clear message that Sarah and Billy were not alone. His presence, with his tall stature and calm demeanor, became a symbol of protection and justice in their eyes. When the trial ended, Harris was convicted and received a severe sentence. Sarah and Billy could finally breathe a sigh of relief. With the shelter's help, Sarah began taking vocational training courses to prepare for stable employment. Meanwhile, Billy, though young, gradually regained his innocent smile as he played in the nurturing environment. Shaq never stopped checking in on them. He frequently visited, bringing new toys for Billy or assisting Sarah with ongoing legal matters. One day, Shaq handed Billy a small basketball and said, I think it's time for you to give this a shot. Who knows? Maybe one day you'll grow taller than me." Billy laughed, a pure, joyful sound ringing out for the first time. "I'll try, but you're too tall." This experience opened Shaq's eyes to the many families like Sarah and Billy who needed help. He began expanding his philanthropic projects, focusing on supporting victims of domestic violence and creating safe environments for children. He used not just his fame, but also his personal resources to make a real difference. As Sarah and Billy slowly rebuilt their lives, Shaq knew he had accomplished something meaningful by giving them a chance to start over. He left the shelter one late afternoon, sunlight glinting off the new toy car in Billy's hand, a symbol of new beginnings. In his heart, he felt a deep sense of peace, knowing the world had become a little better thanks to Billy's bravery and the unwavering belief that kindness could overcome even the darkest circumstances. Time passed, and the painful memories gradually faded, making way for brighter days ahead. On a sunny morning, the Los Angeles Police Department headquarters was filled with balloons and colorful ribbons. Laughter and cheerful chatter filled the air, but the highlight of the day was a ceremony honoring a brave 5-year-old boy, Billy, who had stood up to save his mother. Shaquille O'Neal stepped out of a sleek black SUV, his towering presence immediately grabbing everyone's attention. Today, he wasn't just a guest, he was the main sponsor of the event. Quietly, he had funded the entire ceremony, not for fame or recognition, but to show that courage, no matter where it comes from, deserves to be celebrated. As Shaq entered the hall, his eyes quickly found Billy. The boy was dressed neatly in a white shirt, his golden hair combed perfectly, sitting beside Sarah. Billy's bright eyes sparkled when he saw Shaq, and his familiar toy car was still in his hand, now a symbol of resilience and triumph over adversity. Officer Ramirez, who had helped rescue Billy and his mother, took the stage. His voice echoed through the room as he spoke. "Today, we're not just honoring a 5-year-old boy. We're celebrating extraordinary courage. Billy didn't just speak up in a moment of danger. He created an opportunity to change his mother's life and his own. That is something worth applauding." The audience erupted with applause, and although Billy felt a little shy, he beamed with a radiant smile. Sarah's eyes glistened with emotion. When it was time for the award presentation, Ramirez called Billy to the stage. The boy walked slowly, glancing at Shaq for reassurance. Shaq smiled warmly and gave him a thumbs up, silently encouraging him. "You've got this, kid." Billy received a small medal engraved with the words "Brave Little Hero." He held it tightly, his eyes shining with pride. Ramirez knelt down, placing a hand on Billy's shoulder. "Billy, you're not just your mom's hero. You're an inspiration to all of us. Thank you for your bravery." Billy nodded his thanks, then turned to Shaq, his eyes full of gratitude. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, brightly colored drawing. It depicted a tall man holding hands with a little boy, with the words "My Hero" written at the top. For a moment, the room fell silent as Billy walked over, offering the drawing to Shaq. "Mr. Shaq, this is for you. You're my hero." Shaq, a man rarely moved to tears, felt his throat tighten. He knelt down, accepting the drawing with both hands, his gaze warm. "Thank you, Billy," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "But you're the real hero. You've shown courage greater than anything I've ever seen." Billy hugged Shaq, and Shaq gently placed a protective hand on the boy's back, holding him close. In that moment, everyone felt the profound truth that kindness and bravery can change the world. As the ceremony neared its end, Shaq was invited to speak. Holding Billy's drawing in his hand, he stepped onto the stage with a broad smile. "This," he began, raising the drawing, "is why we're here today. Billy has shown us that courage doesn't depend on age or strength. Each of us can do the right thing, no matter how hard it seems. Let kindness and bravery guide us just as Billy has." The entire room stood up, applauding loudly. It was a recognition not just for Shaq or Billy, but for the lasting impact their actions had on everyone's hearts. After the ceremony, Shaq and Billy stood outside in the bright sunshine. Billy played with his toy car, his smile endless. Sarah approached, taking Shaq's hand. "You didn't just help us. You gave Billy faith in the world. I don't know how to thank you." Shaq smiled softly. "Sarah, You and Billy overcame everything on your own. I just helped open a door. The rest was all you." The ceremony ended, but the story of Billy and Shaq didn't stop there. It became a reminder that no matter how dark the world may seem, a spark of kindness and courage can light even the deepest shadows. As night fell, the city lights of Los Angeles sparkled like stars scattered across the ground. Shaq sat in his small office, a painting Billy had given him during the ceremony resting in front of him. The simple yet deeply emotional strokes captivated him, making it impossible to look away. Once again, he felt the immense power of courage embodied by a child, a force that inspired him to take greater action. Immediately after the ceremony, Shaq decided that Billy and Sarah's story couldn't just be an isolated event. He reached out to nonprofit organizations, women's shelters, and child advocacy centers to launch a nationwide campaign to raise awareness about domestic violence. The campaign, titled Be the Voice, encouraged children and adults alike to bravely speak out against any abuse or injustice they witnessed. Shaq wasn't just a sponsor for the campaign. He became its face. Using his powerful voice and influence, he spread the message to millions. Short videos featuring him sharing Billy's story aired on TV and circulated on social media, drawing significant attention. In these clips, he emphasized that no one, especially a child, should live in fear. Speaking out isn't a sign of weakness. It's an act of courage. When you dare to raise your voice, there will always be someone ready to stand with you. The Be the Voice campaign went beyond just raising awareness. It established 24/7 hotlines for domestic violence victims and opened new shelters in various cities, offering safe havens and free counseling services. Shaq frequently attended press conferences and workshops, sharing his experiences and stressing that anyone could make a difference. "I'm not a superhero," he said in one interview. "I'm just someone who saw something wrong and tried to fix it. But if everyone did that, the world would be so much better." A few months into the campaign, a large community event was held at Los Angeles Central Park to celebrate brave individuals and organizations working to protect victims of domestic violence. Shaq was the guest of honor, but this time he wasn't alone. Sarah and Billy walked alongside him, both glowing in the warm afternoon sun. Billy clutched a small basketball Shaq had given him, his face lighting up as he watched other kids playing on the nearby court. Sarah, now healthier and more confident, carried herself with the poise of someone ready to rebuild her life. The event stage was simply yet meaningfully decorated with images of interlocking hands, symbolizing unity and hope. Shaq stepped onto the stage, not just as a legendary basketball star, but as a representative of change. Today, we not only celebrate our achievements, but we also remind ourselves that the fight against domestic violence is far from over, Shaq said, his deep voice resonating through the crowd. "Billy taught me that even the smallest voice can create a miracle, so I urge all of you, be the voice, be the change. Never fear standing up for what's right." The audience erupted in applause, and in the front row, Billy beamed with pride, his eyes sparkling with joy. Sarah bowed her head, tears streaming down her cheeks, not from pain, but from happiness, knowing she and her son had been given a second chance. As the event ended, Shaq knelt down, took Billy's hand, and led him to the nearby basketball court. The boy giggled as Shaq dribbled the ball and showcased a few tricks, drawing cheers from the other kids. Sarah watched from a distance, a content smile on her face. The Los Angeles sky turned a vibrant orange as the sun set, and the image of Shaq, Sarah, and Billy playing basketball under the twilight became a symbol of unity, courage, and hope. Their story was no longer just about rescuing a family. It had grown into a powerful message: when we stand together, nothing is impossible. The story of Shaq, Billy, and Sarah was not just a journey of overcoming adversity. It was a reminder that courage and kindness can transform lives. No matter who you are, every small action holds the potential to make a difference.